Well, good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 124 of the Prancing Pony podcast, where tonight, well, there's no accounting for East and West.
That's right, folks, and we'll head over to the common room at a great pace on our Longshanks. Who wrote this? Longshanks?
We don't have Longshanks, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say neither one of us. Well, at a great pace, or as great as can be managed, in just a moment.
There you go.
But first, I'm Shawn Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, who hopes to renew the old ties of friendship between the Shire and Bree, Alan Sisto.
Well, not if it means singing, I don't.
You would do anything for friendship, but you won't do that, as Meatloaf said. Is that it?
I would do anything for Bree, but I won't do that.
Well, anyway, speaking of friends, which we don't have anymore after singing that Meatloaf song horribly, we've got a friend joining us here tonight through the magic of digital audio recording.
And time travel. Well, today we're bringing you another new installment of The North Wing.
Folks, you know by now that Barlam and Butterbur had a room or two in the North Wing at the Prancing Pony Inn, made special for hobbits. Well, this is our place made special for some of our listeners, to give us a chance to get to know them.
That's right. Well, rooms at the North Wing are a little bit hard to come by these days, so only our patrons at the Elrond's Honorarium and Círdan's Contribution tiers are eligible. So if you'd like to be one of the next patrons to join us, and it's probably going to be next season at this point, be sure to check out patreon.com/prancingponypod.
Yeah, please do that. We've got a little bit of a waiting list for the North Wing right now, as Alan just alluded to, but we'll get to them all before too long, and we will make room for more if necessary.
Absolutely. Well then, why don't we welcome tonight's guest to the North Wing? There are some who call him Tim.
That's me.
Hi, Tim. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Alan and Shawn, for welcoming me here.
Well, it is our pleasure, and we're glad to have you with us.
Absolutely a pleasure.
The first question out of the box is one we ask everybody. Tell us a bit about yourself. Where are you from? What do you do? What do your loved ones think of all this Tolkien stuff you're so into? Do they think you're a total nerd, or do they like it? That sort of thing.
Well, I'm lucky enough that I have two kids that are able to enjoy Tolkien fare. One of them is very much a geek like me, and the other one just loves them in the movies because of all the great action scenes.
Good.
Unfortunately, he got to see the Hobbit roll out, and after the second one, it was getting kind of painful. But he needed to see that third one and wrap up the story.
Yeah.
We all need closure during a tragedy.
Closure is important. Tim, we understand that you recently celebrated a birthday. Happy birthday to you.
Definitely.
Indeed. Happy birthday.
And I'm curious, did you do anything fun and Tolkien related for your birthday, or did you have any Tolkien birthday wish list items?
Well, this is actually my birthday gift. I am just celebrating a little bit with the family, nice and quiet here in Wisconsin. We're pretty much still like the last death grip of the polar vortex,
Right.
Kind of thawing out. So this is the one kind of exciting thing I get to do.
I should mention, folks, that we do record these segments fairly far in advance sometimes, and no matter when you're hearing this, we're recording this in the middle of February. So Tim's definitely talking about some very icy cold weather. You all remember that polar vortex that struck the American. Most of America, but certainly the Midwest, pretty heavily. So we're glad you've maintained, not frozen status. So
yeah,
definitely
keep the blood flowing through those fingers.
Yeah, stay thawed.
And happy birthday again. Well, I will move on to another question that we ask everybody who comes to the Prancing Pony, and that's when and how did you first discover Tolkien's works? What was your experience like the first time you read it, and why do you keep coming back?
Well, the very first time I bumped into anything about Tolkien, I was a little tiny kid. I was born in '76 when the first movies came out, with The Hobbit, and I saw it in a pre-kindergarten class. I remember only getting to see the first half, and then we had to go. But it was so enthralling, and there was so much excitement that I wanted to know what happened next. Back in those days, we had little tiny record players, and my mom went out, and we didn't have any ability to get videos. Those were the special things you went to the library to see when they presented everything special. They did have these little record players, and they had all of the Hobbit as a story, an audio story.
Oh wow.
And like from the movie, like the music from the movie, and I remember listening to that over
Where
and
there's
over
a
again.
whip, there's a way, right?
Exactly, and I just fell in love with it. And
Cool.
I as soon as I started to learn to read, that was one of the stories I picked up right away, and just fell in
Wow.
love with those stories.
That's neat.
Was it one of those little square books with pictures on every page and a little record on the inside that sort of reads along with the story?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So
remember
we're about the same age. You said you're born in '76, so was I, and I had a few of those books too. Of not of The Hobbit, but I had a few of those of other movies, and man, those things were so cool.
That's
Definitely.
neat.
And I was very fortunate that I had parents that really encouraged me to go out to the library and stuff, as many books as we could into the satchel to take home. And I fell in love with fantasy and in science fiction and mythology and in history. And in
Mm.
Tolkien I find a lot of those married together in a way
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
really exciting.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Boy, that speaks. I don't know about you, Shawn. Actually, I do because I've known you pretty well now. But doesn't that speak exactly to our interests as well? I mean, even
Totally.
outside of
Yeah.
Tolkien, history and mythology
Yep.
are always those things that attract my attention. And I think that's one of the
Absolutely.
reasons that Tolkien has such appeal is
Yeah.
he's able to masterfully weave all of those together. Like he says in the prologue about he'd much prefer a history, even a feigned one,
Mm-hmm.
to some sort of an allegorical deal.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, when I first read Tolkien, the thing that really caught my attention, and I think I've probably said this before on the show, was the fact that it read more like mythology. It read more like
Yeah.
history than,
yeah,
one of the many fantasy books that I had read up to that point. I'd read tons of fantasy, but Tolkien was different.
yeah.
It felt like classic stories, like real stories. And that was,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, very cool.
And as Tolkien would tell C.S. Lewis, there's value even in the false
Mm-hmm.
truths if they speak to a
Yeah.
deeper
Yep.
truth.
They are
Yep.
not merely lies breathed through silver.
silver. Yep.
Yeah.
And I've actually, something that really struck me is I had a son who's reading To Kill a
Mm.
Mockingbird and
Hmm.
finished up and was doing his paper on that. And I just remember, when I was reading over one of his papers, how much this kind of spoke to me. This story that's a total fiction, and yet it touches on deep truths
Mhm.
and the ability for authors to be able to really breathe life into
Yeah.
characters and to really be able to take on themes in a way that allow you to really invest yourself. And there's one phrase about you can to really know somebody you have to be willing to get in their skin
Mm-hmm.
a bit and walk around a few miles in their
Mm-hmm.
shoes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the way that Tolkien does such a great job of making his character in this world so vivid allows you to really
Mm-hmm.
inhabit them and some of the themes and the ideas that it sparks really seem to resonate and I think much more deeply about his work and other really great authors like that. I'm thinking of like the first Dune books
Yeah.
and things like that. Some of those can just really pull you in, and it's beautiful when you can have
Yeah.
that.
Excellent.
It's like Tolkien talked about entering that secondary world, knowing
Yeah.
that it's not real, but
Mhm.
being able to enter it and believe in it. That's
Yeah.
it's pretty powerful.
I think that answers the second half of that question, which was, what was your experience like and why do you keep coming back?
Yeah,
right? I mean,
definitely.
that's exactly why. So
Mhm.
I'm going to go on to a fairly simple one. What is your favorite book in the Legendarium and why? And then if you have one, what's your favorite non-Legendarium work?
Um, the if the probably the favor is the last one I got a chance to read and enjoy, but I guess I got to keep going back to The Hobbit because that was the first one that pulled me in and just it put me on that
Yeah.
road, and sometimes you never know where that road's going to take you.
True. So what about the non-Legendarium work?
Non-legendarium work. Again, it's one of those things where I have so many different things that I find passionate about. I think the Arthurian legend
Oh, yeah.
cycles, I feel really called to. And actually, I was really excited when you guys had
Oh, yeah. Serena Higgins.
Serena
that
Higgins,
commentary or discourse on
Yeah.
that. That was really kind of beautiful to be able to participate in. Also a lot of the Norse legendarium. Being able to just sort of appreciate them and the way that some of the things that Tolkien has done to add
Yeah.
extra depth, has encouraged me to dig
Mhm.
deeper.
Good.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I've got one more question here, and then we'll move on to the lightning round. But my last sort of bigger
Yeah.
question is, do you have a favorite memory of a Tolkien-related activity? Alan likes to share the story about how he and his wife once read the books out loud together. I said a few times about how I enjoyed reading the books to my kids when they were newborns. Do you have anything like that? Any favorite memories of Tolkien in your life?
Very recently, I had one of my children who had some special needs issues who was struggling a bit, and he started deciding to pick up the alphabet that he found, because he saw the scripting in some of the texts that we had, and he decided he was going to, learn how to write the scripts. And for somebody who has autism and who can sometimes dive into a topic and just really get wrapped up in it, the idea that he had so much fun with something he saw that I valued and then he found interesting and then he wanted to share it with me, it was a beautiful piece when he was struggling a bit to have something that gave him some real good joy, and yeah, I'm sure there's lots of other little moments that have been really magical, but that really, really was something kind of special.
Good.
Awesome answer, Tim. Thanks.
I agree. Well, we're going to go ahead and move into a lightning round of quick questions and answers. So these are really designed to be short. I'm going to go ahead and start. Who's your favorite Hobbit?
I got to say Bilbo.
Okay.
Yep, fair enough. What's the one place in Middle-earth you wish you could visit?
The Ares of the Eagles.
Oh, yeah.
Just because to see the vistas,
Yeah. Boy, you're not kidding. What a view that would be.
That would be pretty awesome, yeah.
All right. Would you rather hang out with the Noldor or the Teleri? Assuming these are decent, non-murdering Noldor types.
Oh, I don't want to itch for any trouble. I'll hang out with the Teleri.
You can be honest with us if it's the Noldor.
Plus, the Noldor are a little bit judgy.
Mm-hmm. That is true.
They are.
Yeah, they look down their noses at just about everyone.
They probably would do that with me also.
Baseborn mortal.
They'd have all kinds of interesting names for you, just by virtue of the fact that you're human. Do you have a favorite poem or a favorite song in the Legendarium?
I think the Dwarven song, a Misty Mountain, old, that.
Oh yeah,
And
Far Over the Misty Mountains.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the way that it's able to be inhabited in different ways than some of the work from that original cartoon, but like the movie version, it's very moving.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Finally, well, as Shawn Bean says, one does not simply walk into Mordor, but if you had to, who would you rather have at your side, Finrod or Beren?
Beren, of course.
There you go. Excellent. Well, those are some great answers. Thank you, Tim. We have really, truly enjoyed having you here in the North Wing. But I do think it's time for all of us to head back over to the common room to join the rest of the listeners.
Thank you again, Tim, and I hope we see you back at our next Questions After Nightfall, if not sooner.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And now we return you to the podcast in progress.
Well, we had a great time talking to Tim, as we do every time we get a chance to meet one of our listeners. And we've got a few more reservations lined up for the North Wing, folks, so stay tuned for more.
Absolutely.
Well, next up, we've got a little correction for our previous episode, number 123, on the first half of...
No, this is a correction. You're right.
Amendment.
You're right.
No, this is pretty much just a straight-up correction.
Yeah.
And, of course, that was the episode on the first half of this chapter. We read in the beginning of the chapter that, according to their own tales, the Breelanders were the original inhabitants and were the descendants of the first men that ever wandered into the west of the Middle World.
Right.
Well, we read that, and then we ended up talking at length about how that makes them apparently either descendants of the original Edain or at least cousins who didn't go all the way to Beleriand, and how they've been here ever since the First Age and so forth.
True. And according to the Breelanders themselves, that is the story. But we need to point out that Appendix F tells us something a little different.
Yeah.
The Dunlendings were a remnant of the peoples that had dwelt in the vales of the White Mountains in ages past. The dead men of Dunharrow were of their kin. But in the dark years, others had removed to the southern dales of the Misty Mountains, and thence some had passed into the empty lands as far north as the Barrow Downs. And here's the key. From them came the men of Bree. But long before, these had become subjects of the North Kingdom of Arnor and had taken up the Westron tongue.
Yeah, so it seems like what actually happened is that the Breelanders were descended from the Dunlendings, as the appendix tells us. And we remember that the Dunlendings themselves were actually related to the Haladin. So that's probably the connection back to the Edain of the First Age that they're thinking of. But the Breelanders themselves didn't actually arrive at Bree until much later. Now, the text of the chapter is a little unclear on that, and that's what tripped us up. But the appendix is much clearer.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, we also need to correct what I said about them apparently remaining independent throughout the Third Age, regarding Arnor and then the successor kingdoms of Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rhudaur. Appendix F really does make it clear the Brelanders were subjects of the Kingdom of Arnor. And then Appendix A3 also tells us that, quote, the possession of the Weather Hills and the land westward towards Bree, end quote, was a chief matter of contention between the splinter kingdoms in the Third Age.
Yeah.
And that is why we always say it's important to read the appendices, folks.
Yes, it is. We need to follow our own advice on that.
Absolutely. And now, with that straightened out, let's check out the karaoke party in the common room over at the real Prancing Pony.
Well, now, don't be hasty. Before we do, I actually want to let folks know that for our next episode, we're going to be doing something a little different for our intro segment. Remember what we've got planned for that?
I do.
Folks, as I'm sure you all know by now, the long-anticipated biographical film Tolkien, starring Nicholas Hoult and Lily Collins, opened in the U.S. this weekend. Well, next week, instead of doing another installment of one of our usual intro segments, we've decided to talk about the movie for a few minutes before we jump into our usual chapter discussion on Chapter 10. Going to kind of share our thoughts on the movie with a little Siskel and Ebert routine.
Well, hopefully the movie won't merit our usual Statler and Waldorf routine instead.
Well, there is that. But you know better than I do, because as of recording this a few weeks ago, through the magic of time travel, I still haven't seen the movie as of recording this. But you saw it early out there in L.A., didn't you?
I did. In fact, I saw it all the way back on December 13th, actually, at a special advance screening, thanks to a post from theonering.net that I happened to catch in time. I also got to be a part of a small focus group afterwards to answer a few questions about it.
Very cool.
Now, I couldn't say anything about it, about what I saw that night until now. I couldn't talk about it on Facebook, couldn't talk about it on the podcast, but the movie's been released, or as I should say, the movie will have been released by the time this recording gets released. It's that
time travel and the difficulties it presents for conjugating your verbs.
All the tenses. It's just really hard. But I had to sign an NDA, and I mean, they were pretty serious about it.
Of course, yeah.
But of course, that's no longer in effect. Now, here's the thing, though. The film that I saw 5 months ago might turn out to be a little bit or even rather different from the one that we just saw this weekend that we'll talk about in next episode.
Next week, yeah.
Exactly. So I'm hesitant to go into too much detail. I will try to give you a couple of things that I liked, a couple of things I didn't, and we'll see if they happen to be still in the film.
Okay.
On the plus side, I have to say the costuming, the sets, the locations, cinematography were all really, really good. I'd even go so far as to say the casting was reasonably good. I have to admit, I never really quite saw Tolkien in Nicholas Hoult, though he did a fantastic job in terms of his acting.
Probably a situation where you know Tolkien so well that
that's the thing.
Could anybody play him?
I've seen so many pictures and listened to him talk so much, and that isn't who Nicholas Hoult was. But other than that particular aspect of it, I thought the casting was good. I really like some of the details. There was a very poignant moment at the end, near the end, I should say, when Tolkien was reading that letter from G.B. Smith. And it was, as I recall it, word for word, that letter that went, "My chief consolation is that if I am scuppered tonight, there will still be left a member of the TCBS to voice what I dreamed and what we all agreed upon." And it goes on to say, "May God bless you, my dear John Ronald, and may you say the things I have tried to say long after I am not there to say them, if such be my lot." I will admit to needing my handkerchief at that moment. That was a real, moment of just poignancy, of sorrow. It was such a powerful thing to hear.
Oh, there's no shame in that, man.
None at all.
There with you. Yeah.
And it just totally made me think of reading John Garth's book and all those moments. Yeah, and there were some changes, though, that I didn't particularly care for. That's the problem. I doubt they're going to change all of these things. So probably these are going to be in the story. They had Tolkien and Edith reuniting right as Tolkien was shipping out, and thus not getting married until after he came back. Of course, the real story, they were reunited and engaged in January of 1913. 3 years before they were married, 3 years before he shipped out.
Right.
And in fact, when he was married, he wasn't getting on the boat like they showed in the movie. He was in training and not yet at the front, where he would still end up there 3 months later.
Right. Bit more dramatic that way, I guess. Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, that very, is a moment on the docks where he's going for his, going to his boat, and he turns around and sees her. And, it's typical cinematic stuff.
Yeah, sure.
It also seemed, though, like they had the TCBS starting a lot earlier than it really did. They looked like junior high boys, not the 19-year-old young men that they actually were when they first formed the TCBS. So it made it a little different for me, though I have to say at least the kids they had playing the young versions of all of them were very good. The casting there was good. And there were things that were missed that I was like, why would you not include this, right? In the version that I saw, they didn't include the coal trucks with the Welsh language on them, right? I totally envisioned that when I'm seeing his time as a young child. I'm thinking that's such a formative moment.
Yeah.
But then there were things that were added that totally didn't fit. They had Tolkien, after finding out that Edith was engaged to another man, just absolutely 3 sheets to the wind, drunk. I mean, of course he drank. We know that. But I just don't imagine him walking around totally plastered and making a fool of himself. I mean, if he's going to make a fool of himself, it's going to be stealing a bus and driving it to the Carfax Tower,
right?
Right, and putting on the bear mask or some sort of goofy thing. But this was just a little bit more like angry. I don't know. It just felt very modern and not in character of Tolkien.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, but
that's it. Okay, yeah, I'll be watching for that when I actually do see.
So those are just some little things. I didn't want to talk about the big grand scope of the film so much because I don't know what that's really going to be like. I know that they talked in the focus group about making changes, and we'll see if they made them. I'll be very interested. There were a couple other things that I won't talk about until we include that in our episode next week. But overall, I kind of look at this like the Jackson films in one way, not because they were fantastic like the first 3. I look at this like those because I hope it drives people to the books. I hope it makes people pick up Humphrey Carpenter's, John Garth's, Tom Shippey's, Raymond Edwards. But I'll save the rest of my thoughts for the final version of the film in the next episode.
You know, I've actually talked to some Tolkien fans online, and, we've talked about the possibility of passing out John Garth's book after screenings of the movie. I don't have that kind of money to buy a case of copies of Tolkien and the Great War.
Seriously,
but I kind of would love to. Having not seen it yet, I can just imagine I'm probably going to walk out of it thinking, there's a lot of things I want to say to people who've seen it.
Exactly.
But
I don't have $5,000 per screening to hand out 500 copies of a book.
Hand out a copy of that book to everybody. But if maybe John Garth has an opportunity there to just pass out business cards after one of those screenings.
Read my book.
Here's my website. Buy my book.
Yeah, exactly.
John, if you're listening, take that idea and
there you go. Run with
it.
You don't even have to give us a commission. Just go.
Yeah. Well, no, that's great. Now I'm really intrigued. I'm looking forward to seeing the movie. Since it just came out a couple of days ago, when you're listening to this in the future, there just simply isn't enough time for us to see the movie, take notes, well, in your case, see it again, take notes and record and edit a segment and get it out in today's episode. Yeah. So be sure to check out next week's release, episode 125, where we'll have both of our thoughts on the movie as it was released.
Exactly. Yeah. We only have 36 hours between the time we might have both seen it and the time this episode airs. There was just no way we could have gotten it done. So we're leaving a blank in the next episode.
It'll be the weekend, and it's tough. So
next week.
Yep, for sure. So now I think it's time to head into the common room for Frodo's show-stopping musical number, right?
Not so fast again.
Oh,
we still have the matter of a few corrections, addenda, corrigenda to bring up before we begin. This is going back to our Questions After Nightfall episode a few weeks ago, number 117. Yeah, you know where I'm going with this. We got corrected online.
I know, and we have to do this.
We do. So, folks, near the end of that episode, we answered a question about why 2 unrelated characters were named Ecthelion of the Fountain of Gondolin, and Ecthelion, Steward of Gondor, the father of Denethor. Now, we ended up talking quite a bit about how men reuse names and how men even reuse Elvish names, but that it shouldn't surprise us that a man like Denethor of Gondor would be named after an Elvish hero of the First Age.
Yeah, and that's all true. I mean, in fact, men reuse names so much that both Denethor the Steward from Lord of the Rings and his father Ecthelion were both the second of their name just in the line of stewards.
That's true, but along the way we made a blanket statement that you won't find elves reusing names. Well, it did not take long after releasing the show for a flood of listeners, or maybe it was a trickle, I don't know, to remind us of how wrong that was.
It was a steady stream.
There you go. There you go. Listener Baragon pointed out that the name Rumil is repeated, first as the lore master of Aman in the First Age, who invented the first writing system, and was then usurped by that Feanor guy. And then there was Rumil the border guard in Lothlorien, who was Haldir's brother.
Now, hang on. I'm not going to defend Feanor ever, but come on. The Tengwar were a little bit of an improvement
I know, they
on
were.
the Serati.
Of course they were.
Let's give him that one.
Of course I'll give him that. I'll even give him the Palantir. I'll even give him the Silmarils, for crying out loud. They were beautiful.
Yeah, they were great until...
They were beautiful, right, exactly.
Moving on from that, before we start defending Feanor too much.
Yeah.
Barragont also pointed out that, well, speaking of Feanor, that Finwë actually named all of his sons Finwë as their father names.
Yes, he did.
Though he later added prefixes to their names. And of course, we remember them by different names, but he's absolutely right. Feanor's father name, after the prefix was added, was Curu Finwë.
Right.
Fingolfin's was Nola Finwë, and then Finarfin was Ara Finwë. All that is found in the Shibboleth of Feanor in the Peoples of Middle-earth.
That's right. As you all know now, Finwë was truly the George Foreman of the First Age. Come here, George. Hey, George. George.
Who are you talking to, Dad? Me or my sister?
They're all Georges, yes.
Good stuff. I bet Finwë probably invented a fat-reducing grill, too.
I bet he did. I'm
those
trying
Noldor,
to picture the meme between Finwë and George Foreman. That's hilarious. And you got George Foreman saying, yeah, but at least none of my sons killed anybody.
Right? None of my sons ever kinslayed the Tellery for some boats. Yeah. I don't know where we're going with that.
I'm not going anywhere with that. Let's move on.
Another listener on Twitter, Chris B., pointed out that there was a Legolas Greenleaf at the Fall of Gondolin in the Book of Lost Tales.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah. Now, okay, given the fact that the Book of Lost Tales was never completely reconciled with the later Legendarium, kind of hard to say for sure whether Tolkien really intended for there to be two characters named Legolas in the timeline, or whether he'd written that name before with the Book of Lost Tales, and he just didn't want to waste a good name that might not otherwise see
that may be the
publication.
case there, yeah.
He gave it to an elf in Lord of the Rings. But we don't know. I mean, we can't brush over that. It is entirely possible that Tolkien did intend for there to be two Legolas Greenleafs in the timeline.
That is possible. But even if we could brush over it, our friend Tanya P. reminded us that there were two Gelmirs that were much closer together in the timeline. Gelmir, son of Gurlin, brother of Gwyndor. He was the one who was butchered by Morgoth's forces right before the Nirnaeth Arnoediad. That enraged Gwyndor, which led him to boldly charge and then get captured alive. Only to end up being dead thanks to Turin later on.
Yeah.
And then there was Gelmir.
That's what happens.
Exactly. That's what happens when you listen to Turin. But speaking of Turin, and somebody Turin didn't listen to, there was Gelmir of Gelmir and Arminas fame, who delivered Ulmo's message to Nargothrond, warning Orodreth to cast the stones of your pride into the loud river.
Yeah. So we did pretty much botch that one.
Pretty much.
And appreciate our listeners bringing that up.
Oh,
I think
always.
it's just, we're trying to make a generalization, and well, this is what happens when we do that. Special thanks to Tanya, though, for helping us out by finding the passage in the History of Middle-earth that we were thinking of that led to this, let's call it an overgeneralization.
Let's.
In the Peoples of Middle-earth, in an essay on Glorfindel, whom, wow, we're going to be getting to him really soon, aren't we?
Not soon enough, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Just a few chapters, man. It's pretty close, but... Well, Tolkien rationalized that the Glorfindel who fell at Gondolin in the First Age must be the same as the Glorfindel we meet in Lord of the Rings, and it's in part because he says the reduplication of names between two people named Glorfindel, though possible, would not be credible. No other major character in the Elvish legends, as reported in the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings, has a name borne by another Elvish person of importance.
Importance.
So it just wouldn't be credible. And I think he means, for us, the reader, for there to be two different important Elvish characters named Glorfindel.
Right.
Though it was technically possible. And I would add that none of that precludes the idea of men naming their children after important characters from Elvish legends, as we said.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, Tanya also pointed us to Laws and Customs Among the Eldar, one of my favorite essays, in Morgoth's Ring, where Tolkien says, in elder times, the chosen name, or second name, was usually freshly devised, and though framed according to the structure of the language of the day, it often had no previous significance. In later ages, when there was a great abundance of names already in existence, it was more often selected from names that were known. So, by the Third Age, it wasn't just possible for an elf born to be given an existing name, but apparently it was more common than we know, based on the important characters we see in the story.
There you go. So, enough about that one. But There is another
There's
one
more?
that we've got to correct.
But wait, there's more.
Yeah, that's the way we do it at the Prancing Pony podcast. When we flub big.
That's right.
Earlier in that same episode, I alluded to a comment that we had made in an episode that hadn't been released yet at the time,
Right.
but has been as of now, about the Witch King's presence in Eriador and the fact that he was awakening evil things just by being there. And I said something to the effect of, and that's just with a lesser ring on his finger. Well, a listener named Ethan F. messaged us and pointed out that by the time of the War of the Ring, the Nazgul no longer wear their rings. Sauron holds them.
Yeah.
And the Lord of the Rings is somewhat unclear on that, which is why I was confused. I will admit I was just I was just wrong about that.
Right.
The reason I was confused is because in the Council of Elrond, when Gandalf is working through the process of elimination to prove that Frodo's ring is the One Ring, he says, the 9 the Nazgul keep, the 7 are taken or destroyed,
right.
the 3 we know of. Now, that makes it sound like the Nazgul do have their own rings.
That's true.
And that's why I thought that.
That's true. But elsewhere in the Shadow of the Past, Gandalf tells Frodo the 9 he has gathered to himself. Now, that's admittedly a little vague. Gathered could mean that the Sauron holds the rings personally, or just that he's got them accounted for and he's gathered the 9, the ring wraiths, that he's got
The
them
wearers or something. Yeah,
under his
right.
power,
Yeah.
and which could mean that they're still worn by the ring wraiths who are his slaves.
I'll admit, I interpreted it the second way. I thought Sauron had gathered the ring wraiths to him and he was letting them wear their rings. But, since they're completely under his power,
Right.
he controls them anyway. So those are both statements made by Gandalf, but we should remember, as Tolkien himself might say, because he says it about Treebeard in one of his letters, Gandalf is just a character in Tolkien's story, and he doesn't necessarily know or understand everything.
That's right.
If you go beyond The Lord of the Rings, there is quite a bit of commentary out there that clearly contradicts the idea that the ring wraiths wear their rings in the Third Age.
Yeah, it's pretty clear once you get to Unfinished Tales. Yeah.
It is, yeah. In The Hunt for the Ring, in Unfinished Tales, Tolkien calls the Nazgul Sauron's mightiest servants, who had no will but his own, being each utterly subservient to the ring that had enslaved him, which Sauron held.
There you go.
And a little later, in another version of that story in the same section, Tolkien sort of restates that by saying the Nazgul are entirely enslaved to their 9 rings, which he, Sauron, now himself held.
Precisely. That's what I was thinking. I just missed it when you mentioned the Witch King's ring. In letter 246 to Eileen Elgar, Tolkien echoed that by saying that Sauron, quote, still through their 9 rings, which he held, had primary control of the ring wraith's wills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So all very conclusive that Tolkien believed Sauron held the 9 rings and the Nazgul themselves did not wear them by the time of the Third Age. Now, I still stand by the point that we were both trying to make, which is that evil attracts evil, right?
Yeah, that's why we do such a great show. I'm just kidding.
We do. That's true. Yeah. But, since the Witch King's power is like, come on, it's like 99.99999% the ring at this point.
Well, yeah, because if the ring ceased to be, he would cease to be. Yeah.
He would cease to be. Yeah. So he's pretty much, walking ring power.
That is true.
So I will say, even though I was incorrect in one very, very important detail, and I won't downplay that, I think the comparison was still a good one, right? Right? Right?
Yes, I think so. I like letting you hang there. That was fun.
Thank you for that. Anyway, now I think it's probably time for us to get into the chapter discussion, don't you think? Please say yes.
Yes. I think it's time to put these corrections behind us as soon as possible. And we're going to pick up exactly where we left off at the end of last week's episode after Frodo pointed to this man in the corner and said, "Who is that?
Who is that guy? Why didn't you introduce him?"
Exactly. Yeah. I've got you reading the first bit there.
"Him?" said the landlord in an answering whisper, cocking an eye without turning his head. "I don't rightly know. He's one of the wandering folk, rangers we call them. He seldom talks, not but what he can tell a rare tale when he has the mind. He disappears for a month or a year, and then he pops up again. He was in and out pretty often last spring, but I haven't seen him about lately. What his right name is I've never heard, but he's known round here as Strider. Goes about at a great pace on his long shanks, though he don't tell nobody what cause he has to hurry. But there's no accounting for east and west, as we say in Bree, meaning the rangers and the shire folk, begging your pardon. Funny you should ask about him." But at that moment Mr. Butterbur was called away by a demand for more ale, and his last remark remained unexplained.
Which is constantly a problem, it seems, with him, by the way.
It is sort of his M.O. He's constantly about to tell you something really interesting before somebody needs
Exactly.
another beer.
Rangers, by the way, in the local dialect of Brie is actually en la choc. I just wanted you to know that.
Oh, well done. It's been far too long.
I know, we haven't had a
since we've
Bab 5
had
reference in ages.
A Bab 5 reference in so long.
Aragorn's going to introduce himself and say, we live for the one, we die for the one. So, anyway.
He does have that green stone.
He does,
he
yeah. Oh, I'm pretty sure the green stone on Aragorn came before the green stone on Straczynski's show.
Pretty sure J. Michael Straczynski was thinking of the green stone.
I'm fairly sure he was. Oh, goodness. Great stuff. I love how once again it triggers this memory and then Bartleman just completely forgets.
Just goes up. I'm sorry, somebody needs another drink.
Is it fair to say that when I first read this as a teenager, I didn't understand that, and now as a 50-year-old with 2 children, I totally get it?
Oh, yeah.
My brain will very often go, what was I just saying?
Yeah.
What was I just talking about? Oh, man, I forget. Well,
my brain is constantly full of like 4 things that I'm going to do in a certain order as soon as I'm done with the 3 things that I was just asked to do by my kids.
Exactly. Yeah. And by the time I've done 2 of them, I forget what that 3rd one is, let alone what the other 4 were. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I go through a lot of notebooks in my house.
I'm constantly telling the assistant who shall remain nameless, let's see, order me paper towels. I constantly telling her to remind me about something. So I get Bartleman these days. I really do. Anyway.
Yep. Yep. The things being a parent will do to you.
Yes, it is. Sorry.
And there we are with more of our
dad jokes. We're going to catch more grief for that. Sorry, folks. It's who we are.
We're dads.
Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up there. I know there's not a lot there. I want to pick up the very next segment, and then we'll kind of discuss the whole bit.
Okay.
Frodo found that Strider was now looking at him, as if he had heard or guessed all that had been said. Presently, with a wave of his hand and a nod, he invited Frodo to come over and sit by him. As Frodo drew near, he threw back his hood, showing a shaggy head of dark hair flecked with gray, and in a pale, stern face, a pair of keen gray eyes. "I'm called Strider," he said in a low voice. "I'm very pleased to meet you, Master Underhill, if old Butterbur got your name right." "He did," said Frodo stiffly. He felt far from comfortable under the stare of those keen eyes. "Well, Master Underhill," said Strider, "if I were you, I should stop your young friends from talking too much. Drink, fire, and chance meeting are pleasant enough, but, well, this isn't the Shire. There are queer folk about. Though I say it shouldn't, you may think," he added with a wry smile, seeing Frodo's glance. "And there have been even stranger travelers through Bree lately," he went on, watching Frodo's face. Frodo returned his gaze, but said nothing, and Strider made no further sign. I like that. I like that he said his piece and he's done. He's read Zig Ziglar's book about closing. Whoever talks first loses.
Yep.
Anyway.
Nicely done. I don't even know what to say about it. Yeah. It's such a cool introduction to this character.
Isn't it?
And there's just so much there. We don't really know anything about who he is yet, but there's just so much potential there. Even, there's just so many clues here that there's more to this guy than he appears.
Oh, yeah. Well, the pale, stern face, but the pair of keen gray eyes, and just a few lines later, the stare of those keen eyes. That tells you a lot, I think, about who he is and why Frodo feels just a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. Even the flecks of gray in his hair, a sign.
He's not a young
been
man.
around. He's older than he looks. Yeah.
He's seen some of the world.
Mm-hmm.
I love how he implies that, sure enough, that's not really your name. Master Underhill, if Butterbur got your name right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, the wisdom he offers is spot on. You need to stop your friends from
talking too much.
Talking so much. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, these guys are getting sloppy. They need to be more on their guard. And,
loose lips sink ships. Yeah.
Yeah. And he
loose lips sink fellowships.
Oh, wow. That's not even good.
No,
not even bad.
I'm not even sure. That's just terrible.
But yeah, there are queer folk about. I love that he acknowledges that, that sounds very strange coming from somebody looking like him.
Yeah, exactly. The wry smile.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. We start to see already a little bit of humanity from him, a little bit of humility as well. I think he understands how he comes across.
I think that's a good point, that humility, because, Aragorn's one of those characters, especially if you read the books after you've seen the movies. Aragorn in the books can come across as a little haughty because he is more sure of himself than he is in the movies. Thankfully, I think book Aragorn is better than movie Aragorn in a lot of ways.
I agree.
No offense to Viggo Mortensen, who played that character very well. Fine, just wasn't really the character from the book.
Right.
But yeah, I can't remember where I was going with that. But the humility. It was, because he does have this haughty side, but you're right. He's got this humble side as well. And I think that's really cool. There's a balance there in his character.
There really is. Now, they're starting to move on, these friends, into other stories, and I've got you telling us exactly what's going on here.
Oh, Pippin. All right.
I know, silly Pip.
To his alarm, Frodo became aware that the ridiculous young Took, encouraged by his success with the fat mayor of Mitchell Delving, was now actually giving a comic account of Bilbo's farewell party. He was already giving an imitation of the speech, and was drawing near to the astonishing disappearance.
Oh, just come on.
I know. I was really? Like, dude, come on.
Come on. Think, man.
Don't you know everybody's telling stories about Mad Baggins? All right.
Anyway.
Okay. Back to the text.
Yes.
Frodo was annoyed. It was a harmless enough tale for most of the local hobbits, no doubt. Just a funny story about those funny people away beyond the river. But some, old Butterbur, for instance, knew a thing or two, and had probably heard rumors long ago about Bilbo's vanishing. It would bring the name of Baggins to their minds, especially if there had been inquiries in Bree after that name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is why Strider essentially tells him, you need to do something right now.
Yeah.
Pippin just not paying attention, really.
Boy, does he, though. I know we'll get there in a minute.
Yeah, we'll get there. I didn't tell you to do that, Frodo.
Yeah.
You should do anything, but don't do that.
But don't do that. Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah. Talk about people making poor choices when they're drunk. You were talking about the Tolkien biopic earlier.
That's right.
I mean, that's kind of what's going on all over this chapter. Just Pippin's he's getting too comfortable. He's loving the attention.
Oh, he does. Yeah. Encouraged by his success. His success with that story, the story that got him laughs and applause and attention.
All right, what other good stories do I have? Oh, here's one. Yeah.
And this is, I think it's no surprise that it's the youngest of the three travelers with him.
That makes perfect sense.
You know, I'm not bashing on youth. This isn't an anti-millennial.
No. It's a matter of experience,
wisdom, and discretion,
and lack of judgment. Yeah,
that's all it is.
Yeah, and let's face it, Pippin is, as the youngest of the hobbits, he's probably used to taking orders from Frodo and Merry. Not Sam so much, but no. But you can certainly understand how, now that he's got a taste of, this limelight, so to speak, he really wants. He's kind of going to go for it. He wants to get more attention. He wants to get the laughs.
Yeah. I can just hear the lyrics to the Rush song Limelight right now. Okay. Well, I was thinking of the lyrics, not the opening guitar riff that you're very, mediocre reproduction.
That's what I do.
That's what
mediocre guitar scat is my forte. I was kind of hoping you would jump in and sing it, but I guess I didn't do enough bars for you.
Well, yeah, you got to give me there's a longer lead in than that. I got to make you do the mediocre guitar stuff for a while longer. No, I'm not going to do that. Anyway, so Frodo, there you go. I can't remember.
The unreal.
Approaches the unreal.
Approaches the unreal.
That's right. Yeah.
For those who think and be. Okay, I got to stop because I'll be here all night.
Yeah.
You don't want to see me at a Rush concert. I am belting the entire time at a Rush concert.
I bet you are. All right. So Frodo, of course, realizes we're nearing disaster here, and he can't think necessarily of what to do, so he just jumps up and does something, and that's where I'm going to pick up.
All right.
Frodo jumped up and stood on a table. Well, there's your problem. I mean, really, can we just stop right there and point out that standing on a table is
any solution to any problem that involves jumping up and standing on a table in a bar? Yeah.
It's probably a bad solution. I mean, really, that's enough right there.
Yeah.
So Frodo jumped up and stood on a table and began to talk. The attention of Pippin's audience was disturbed. Some of the hobbits looked at Frodo and laughed and clapped, thinking that Mr. Underhill had taken as much ale as was good for him. Frodo suddenly felt very foolish and found himself, as was his habit when making a speech, fingering the things in his pocket. He felt the ring on its chain and, quite unaccountably, the desire came over him to slip it on and vanish out of the silly situation. It seemed to him somehow as if the suggestion came to him from outside, from someone or something in the room. He resisted the temptation firmly and clasped the ring in his hand, as if to keep a hold on it and prevent it from escaping or doing any mischief. At any rate, it gave him no inspiration. He spoke a few suitable words, as they would have said in the Shire. "We are all very much gratified by the kindness of your reception, and I venture to hope that my brief visit will help to renew the old ties of friendship between the Shire and Bree." And then he hesitated and coughed. Everyone in the room was now looking at him. "A song!" shouted one of the hobbits. "A song! A song!" shouted all the others. "Come on now, master, sing us something we haven't heard before." For a moment, Frodo stood gaping. Then, in desperation, he began a ridiculous song that Bilbo had been rather fond of, and indeed rather proud of, for he had made up the words himself. It was about an inn, and that is probably why it came into Frodo's mind just then.
I want to stop and I want to say something about this passage.
Okay.
Because I think we've been a little bit too hard on Frodo. We're sitting here talking about how it was a foolish thing to do to get up on this table and sing this song. In reality, this is a good idea.
Yeah.
He had no choice. And this is a good idea right now. And he did
Yes.
get the attention of Pippin's audience, getting up there.
Job done.
And exactly. Starting to give this speech to get people's attention away from Pippin and whatever he's going to say next. Brilliant idea.
Yes.
Then they ask for a song. Okay.
Pippin, what do you have? What can we sing, Pippin?
And Pippin gets up and sings the Ballad of Bilbo Baggins.
Well, yeah, that would be
not
bad.
the Nimoy version.
No, really? That would be a shame. I'd love to hear the Leonard Nimoy version. That'd be great.
But no, I mean, it's a pretty good idea. Okay, they ask for a song. Maybe you can keep it going for like one song. He's not making a mistake yet.
No, not yet.
I think the mistake comes later.
You're right.
And I want to be fair to Frodo here.
I do too. You make a good point. Before we discuss the actual song itself, though, I think we need to hear just a little bit of it. What do you think?
I think so. Let's do it.
There is an inn, a merry old inn, beneath an old grey hill, and there they brew a beer so brown that the man in the moon himself came down one night to drink his fill. The ostler has a tipsy cat that plays a five-stringed fiddle, and up and down he runs his bow, now squeaking high, now purring low, now sawing in the middle. The landlord keeps a little dog that's mighty fond of jokes. When there's good cheer among the guests, he cocks an ear at all the jests and laughs until he chokes.
I love that. Such a rare pleasure to be able to include just a little snippet of the professor himself. But
yeah, so
that
awesome.
Was great stuff.
The J.R.R. Tolkien audio collection is so great.
Highly recommended, folks, and it will be in the show notes, so pick that up when you can.
Well, let's talk about this song a little bit, shall we?
Yeah, plenty here, yeah.
Yeah, there really is. And this is just one of my favorite moments in this book, honestly, I have to say.
Such a wonderful moment, it is.
Yeah. I'll start by talking a little bit about a might have been. Hammond and Skull mentioned that originally this was supposed to be an early version of the Troll song.
Yeah.
That Sam is going to sing later on in Flight to the Ford. And we'll talk a little bit more on that in a bit, I know. We
will. But for now, we're going to talk about this version. And it's a revision of a poem that Tolkien wrote called The Cat and the Fiddle, a nursery rhyme undone and its scandalous secret unlocked, which was published in a journal in 1923.
I love that original title. It gives this sort
Isn't that great?
This like this, the secret history of what happened.
It's almost like a clickbait headline in 1923. It's
right.
scandalous secret
exactly.
unlocked.
Yeah. What really happened the night the cat played the fiddle? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this version of the poem was republished later on as The Man in the Moon Stayed Up Too Late in The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which continues a trend that we've seen a few times now, but really close ties between this first book of Lord of the Rings and Poems and Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which is just fascinating to me. Now, there is also sort of a companion poem that appears immediately after this one in Adventures of Tom Bombadil called The Man in the Moon Came Down Too Soon. But Tolkien actually tells us that was probably based on a Gondorian source, while this poem was written by Bilbo, as the text tells us.
Well, it's very obviously based on the nursery rhyme, Hey Diddle Diddle, which Tolkien underscores, and I love the way he says this, by saying that only a few words of it are now remembered.
That's awesome, yeah.
Isn't it? Hammond and Skull share this observation from George Perk Johnston, who suggested that Tolkien might also have been inspired by 19th century fantasy author George MacDonald, who included his own version of the nursery rhyme, The True History of the Cat and the Fiddle, in his book At the Back of the North Wind, which was published in 1871.
And because Tolkien says that this is the full version of this poem that we can only remember a few words of now, this is another example
Right.
of one of my favorite things in Tolkien's work, which is this idea of these asterisk realities that Tom Shippey talks about.
Yeah.
These reconstructed ancestors of later stories and poems and myths and so on. Shippey actually discusses this idea in relation to both of Tolkien's Man in the Moon poems at some length in Road to Middle-earth, and I'll read a little bit of that here.
Mm-hmm.
He says, what they do is to provide a narrative and semi-rational frame for the string of totally irrational non sequiturs which we now call nursery rhymes. How could the cow jump over the moon? Well, it might if the moon were a kind of vehicle parked on the village green while its driver had a drink. If one assumes a long tradition of idle children repeating thoughtless tales in increasing confusion, one might think that poems like Tolkien's were the remote ancestors of the modern rhymes. They are asterisk poems. They also contain, at least in their early versions, hints of mythological significance. The man in the moon who fails to drive his chariot while mortals panic, and his white horses champ their silver bits, and the sun comes up to overtake him.
You know, that last point about the hints of mythological significance, that's really curious because this is a very different mythology about the man in the moon than what we learn in the Silmarillion, about the two trees and then about Tilion, who guides the moon,
Right.
and the wayward and uncertain nature of his course across the sky, which causes the lunar phenomena from phases to eclipses.
Right. And Hammond and Skull, going back to some of their commentary on this, they point out that the man in the moon must be assumed to represent stories and legends among men and hobbits who had little idea of the real state of affairs in Arda, little knowledge of these stories from the Silmarillion. Now, this poem was written by Bilbo, who we tend to think of as more enlightened than, well, most other people in the Shire, maybe everybody else in the Shire at this point.
Maybe, yeah.
But by the time Frodo last saw him, he wasn't quite the lore master that he would later become after spending some time in Rivendell. So, he probably didn't know the whole true story from the Silmarillion when he wrote this. But as Hammond and Skull say, the true story, some memory of the true story somewhere, evidently gave rise to stories such as the one told in this poem. You almost get this idea that, maybe hobbits in the Shire have long forgotten the real story that's told in the Silmarillion. They don't remember exactly why Tilion isn't always on time, but, they've made up other stories to explain these observable phenomena of the moon. And so, as Shippey says, there are hints of mythological significance even in a very silly story like this one.
Tilion doesn't arrive early, nor is he late. Bilbo Baggins, he arrives precisely when he means to. Anyway.
One of my favorite memes that was ever posted on some Facebook group was a picture of the moon shining in the daylight sky, and somebody posting it with the caption like, "Tilion, go home, you're drunk." I don't know who came up with that, but props to whoever did. I love that.
Brilliant stuff. I love that. Well, didn't we speculate that Tilion was like Orome's old frat bro?
I think we did.
Maybe him stopping for a drink isn't as ridiculous as it sounds.
Right, yeah, maybe.
Oh, man. But, it is interesting to note that even though they don't know, that is the hobbits and men, don't know these ancient origin stories of the moon and sun, they do still refer to the sun as she and to the moon as he. Remember Aryan, the Maya of the sun from the Silmarillion, too bright were the eyes of Aryan for even the Eldar to look on.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely very interesting. I mean, I think it's not entirely surprising if Westron has grammatical gender.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know enough about Westron. I don't know if there really is enough written about Westron to know for sure. But, I mean, one thing you find in real-world languages, there are, to borrow Shippey's phrase, there are hints of mythological significance in the genders of nouns for the sun and moon in languages in the real world. I mean, English doesn't have grammatical gender anymore, but in German, I believe, the noun for the sun is feminine. Now, you took German, right? It's like die Sonne. And then the noun for the moon is masculine, which is der Mond.
Yeah, der Mond, that's right.
And that seems to be a relic of Germanic mythology, in which the sun was actually associated with a goddess, so the sun was feminine and the moon was masculine because it had a male god.
There you go.
And that's the template that Tolkien seems to have followed in the Silmarillion. By contrast, if you're familiar with, Romance languages like Spanish or French, those typically have a feminine noun for the moon, like La Luna, and a masculine noun for the sun, like El Sol. And that comes straight from Greco-Roman mythology, if you think of like Apollo and Artemis.
Classical mythology, right. Man, that's great stuff. Now, although we don't have time to sidebar on that now because we have yet another sidebar waiting, the Man of the Moon is also a prominent character in Tolkien's novella, Roverandom.
That's right. And as you said, we do have another sidebar waiting, but I want to drop one little bit of word nerdery here before we jump into that. We just heard Tolkien say this word ostler, and I just wanted to point out for folks that an ostler is someone who looks after the horses of people staying at an inn. So that would actually be the job of Bob here at the Prancing Pony, which is why moments from now, after Frodo finishes the song, somebody is going to suggest Bob ought to learn his cat the fiddle.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, in the meantime, though, we now have coming up Double Sidebar.
We should have never given you those effects.
No, don't give me toys like that.
You just abuse them. That's what you do, sir.
You know, it's actually been so long since I've done that.
It really has, yeah.
The effects that I use these days, and it's very, very rare. I think I added them for the
white
Barrow
voices.
White's voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually just done in post.
The songs of the Barry White.
The songs of the Barry White. That's so great. I love that. Oh, man. I did hear from some people on Facebook, though. Apparently, when that first came on, it absolutely made some people jump.
Really? That's awesome.
Yeah. They were listening to the show, and then all of a sudden I said something like, I don't remember what the White's first line was, but this just
it made me jump, dude. And when I heard it, I was like, because you told me you were doing it, but I didn't get a chance to hear it until I listened to the
pretty
episode.
Cool stuff.
That's awesome. Well,
anyway, so now on with the double sidebar, not a triple sidebar.
Our second sidebar is on songs for the philologists.
Yeah.
Earlier, we mentioned that Tolkien's original drafts intended for this to be the troll song that Sam's going to sing a few chapters from now. There's a little bit of a story there from Return to the Shadow, History of Middle-earth, Volume 6, that is worth going into, even if it's just to talk about, well, what's probably, the rarest Tolkien-related book out there, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
In The Return to the Shadow, Christopher Tolkien tells us that the original version of the troll song, which was called The Root of the Boot, has its origins in Tolkien's time at the University of Leeds. That original version, with Tolkien's later corrections, is actually printed in The Return of the Shadow, and it's definitely worth a read, and we're not going to go into that right now. We might actually come back to it in a few chapters when Sam sings the later version of the troll song.
Yeah, I think we will, but what we really wanted to talk about from that, though, is this little book, Songs for the Philologists. Now, don't go looking for it on Amazon or any bookstore you might find. The story behind this is really interesting. When Tolkien was at Leeds, he and his good friend and fellow philologist E.V. Gordon created the Viking Club. Now, they didn't go around wearing horned helmets that we know of. They certainly didn't go around cheering on American football teams from Minnesota, nor did they binge watch the recent television show. No, this society was dedicated to two very, very good things, apparently: drinking beer and reading Icelandic sagas.
Sign me up.
Members would also invent original songs in Old English, Gothic, Old Icelandic, and Old Norse, which just totally disqualifies me. Yeah, we're done. Now, interestingly, Tolkien even mentions the Viking Club, sans the beer, in letter 7, which was his application to the professorship of Anglo-Saxon at Oxford, which is probably
I wonder why he left out the beer when he was applying for a job. I don't know.
Yeah.
Now, so back to Return to the Shadow, Christopher Tolkien tells us that E.V. Gordon, created typescripts of some of these original songs for his students.
Yeah.
In Tolkien's own words, Gordon's sources were manuscripts of my own verses and his, with many editions of modern and traditional Icelandic songs taken mostly from Icelandic student songbooks. Well, in 1935 or 1936, a former student at Leeds, a Dr. A.H. Smith of London University, gave one of these typescripts, uncorrected, to a group of honor students there for them to set up on the Elizabethan printing press. That was like a reconstructed wooden hand press. And the result was a booklet bearing the title Songs for the Philologists by J.R.R. Tolkien, E.V. Gordon, and others.
But that's not the end of the story, unfortunately. In 1940, as Christopher Tolkien tells us, Tolkien received a letter from the school explaining that when the books were ready, Dr. Smith realized that he had never asked your permission, and that the books must not be distributed till that had been done. Well, Dr. Smith apparently never got around to asking for that permission, so the letter continues. The sad result is that most of the copies printed, being left undistributed in our rooms, have perished like the press itself in the fire which destroyed that part of the college building. That fire was the result of bombing during World War II. and only a very few copies, about 14 most believe, survived. 8 of those are in libraries, so 6 are in private collections.
Wow. It's
Yeah.
man, it's heartbreaking. And so what? There were 30 total songs in the compilation.
Yeah.
Tolkien wrote
That's right.
nearly half of them.
I think like 13 of them, yeah.
Yeah. Some of these poems, 3 of them in Old English and 1 in Gothic, are actually included in the appendices of Tom Shippey's The Road to Middle-earth, with translations, I would point out.
Well, yeah. Otherwise, they're not very useful for most of us.
Right. So, since you're unlikely to be able to afford the $30,000 plus price tag that privately held copies are sold for, this might be your only way to read some of Tolkien's songs from the collection.
Yeah. So I would make sure you pick up a copy of The Road to Middle-earth and just take a look at those.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah. I will not be adding that to my collection. I just want to make that clear.
Well,
I just really.
Yeah, no, I don't see how that's possible to do, honestly.
No. And I imagine that the prices would be much higher now. I think that might have been the last actually, sold price, which was years and years ago. So I imagine it's significantly higher.
That's what I was thinking. If you can find a seller,
Yeah. Yeah. And since there's only a half dozen that aren't in libraries, good luck with that.
Yep.
I'm assuming one of them would be the Bodleian, but
I wonder if the Bodleian or Marquette might have.
Marquette might be one. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe one day we'll find out.
Maybe so. We'll have to look around.
Well, now that we've talked a little bit about that song and the wonderful stories behind it and the wonderful stories about the song that might have taken its place, I'm going to go ahead and have you pick back up right after the end of that song.
Okay. They made Frodo have another drink. I like that. They made him.
They made him. Oh, sure. Twist my arm.
Right.
Oh, no, not another drink.
Oh, please don't throw me in that briar patch. They made Frodo have another drink and then begin his song again, while many of them joined in. For the tune was well known, and they were quick at picking up words. It was now Frodo's turn to feel pleased with himself. He capered about on the table, and when he came a second time to "The Cow Jumped Over the Moon," he leaped in the air, much too vigorously, for he came down, bang, into a tray full of mugs, and slipped and rolled off the table with a crash, clatter, and bump. The audience all opened their mouths wide for laughter and stopped short in gaping silence, for the singer disappeared. He simply vanished, as if he had gone slap through the floor without leaving a hole.
Where'd he go?
The local hobbits stared in amazement, and then sprang to their feet and shouted for Barliman. All the company drew away from Pippin and Sam, who found themselves left alone in a corner and eyed darkly and doubtfully from a distance. It was plain that many people regarded them now as the companions of a traveling magician of unknown powers and purpose. But there was one swarthy Breelander who stood looking at them with a knowing and half-mocking expression that made them feel very uncomfortable. Presently he slipped out of the door, followed by the squint-eyed Southerner. The two had been whispering together a good deal during the evening.
And spoiler alert, that swarthy Breelander is named Bill.
Bill
We'll get to
Fernie.
that later. Good old Bill Fernie.
Yep. And the squint-eyed Southerner, the Dunlending, we talked about him.
Yeah, the Dunlander.
Was it the last episode we talked about him?
The last episode, I believe, where, it turns out he was the one who just a couple of days ago was in the presence of the Witch King.
Right,
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Good guys, class acts.
What a hilarious moment this was, though, other than that, right up until the disappearance.
Here's, just so we're clear, here's where Frodo makes his stupid mistake, I think.
Here's your sign. I mean,
precisely. Yeah, I mean,
and you can see it happening. It was Frodo's turn to feel pleased with himself.
Yep,
there it is. There it is, folks.
And to be fair,
saying, "Oops,
oops." Yeah, exactly. He's making the same mistake Pippin was making a moment ago.
Yep.
So the taking attention away from Pippin has now backfired because now he's doing the same silly things. To be fair,
yes, he is.
They made, and I'm making air quotes as I say that, they made him have another drink first, and then they made him sing it again.
Yeah, because he has no free will.
Right, of course. So he certainly had impaired judgment from all the drinking. So there's that.
I want to be a real boy. I mean, he's just a puppet. Really.
Yeah, right. Exactly. No, he's got impaired judgment. Okay, who hasn't
impaired judgment?
Who hasn't sung?
He's wearing a lampshade as a hat.
Who hasn't
that's impaired.
Sung
all right.
one too many songs on the table of the bar after one too many drinks?
My hand is raised over here, sir.
I said after one too many drinks. I know that's not you. But...
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, that's true. Kind of by definition.
Right.
Oh, goodness. This is a great moment, though. I love it. And I love how they react. I mean, they just...
Yeah, right.
And then they're, Parliament, get out of here. Oh, get away from these guys.
Yeah.
Sorcerer, do you have strange powers, too?
A witch! A witch!
A witch!
He disappeared into the floor.
He came back.
See?
Oh, goodness. What else floats in water? Anyway, we're not going to get anywhere if we keep quoting Python or for a moment I was trying to quote Frozen there. That was the I can't remember his name. The Duke of
Weaseltown. Weaseltown or Weaselton?
Weaselton.
Yeah.
Who, by the way, is voiced by Alan Tudyk, the
Wash
actor
of Firefly
who played
fame.
Wash. That's right. One of my favorite television shows ever.
He's been a voice in like every Disney movie for the last 15 years or something.
I know. Yeah, he's been a mainstay, hasn't he?
Yeah.
And I still can't hear him in that role. Like I can't picture him doing it. He did such a great job of playing this smarmy old guy with the bad
Maybe
toupee.
not 15. It might be more like 10 years, but he's been in every Disney movie for the last few years.
He has been in just about every one. A little bit of a sidebar here, not a full-blown sidebar. Otherwise, I'd have to bust out the triple sidebar sound effect, and I don't know if I even have that one.
I don't think the world can handle it, Alan.
No, I don't think it can. You're not ready, folks, for that. Okay. We're coming back to old Harry at the gate here. In older editions, and by older, I don't mean old, I mean just before 2004, so 15 years ago, we see that Harry the gatekeeper also went out just behind them. That was in the text. Now, as Hammond and Skull described, there were references to Harry Goatleaf being in the inn in the early drafts, but Tolkien clearly deleted them, and yet this one still made it into the published version. So they mentioned a discussion with Christopher Tolkien where he argued that this was an anomalous reference and should be deleted, just as the other references had already been deleted by his father, one where Harry calls for his backup at the gate, and another when Frodo sees him in the common room. Now, we happen to side with Christopher Tolkien on this by voting to remove Harry from the ranks of the questionable.
Yeah, and it's a good thing, too. I mean, in one draft, Tolkien has Trotter tell Frodo that Harry Goatleaf is a mean old curmudgeon, and that just wouldn't do it all for our Questions After Nightfall episodes, would it?
No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. There's also another tidbit, though, that's worth mentioning from an old draft. Shadowfax's name comes up for some reason, and I don't remember the context at this moment, but at one point in the process, Shadowfax's name was Nerethal, meaning Firefoot.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Tolkien wrote in pencil two other possible names, Fairfax and Snowfax, which neither of those are great, but no. I'm just glad that it's not Nerethal because, that really sounds like a pharmaceutical product. I mean, talk to your doctor about Nerethal. Burn away your athlete's foot with Nerethal. I mean,
no.
Well, it means Firefoot.
Yep, it works too well, actually. Well, what's interesting about that.
Talk to your doctor if you've been to places where fungal infections are common. Nerethal can cause side effects, such as itchy feet.
Yep.
Death.
Yep.
Anyway, sorry.
No, what's fascinating about that is Firefoot actually didn't completely go away, did it?
You're right. No, it didn't.
In the finished version of The Lord of the Rings, Firefoot in Westron, not in Elvish, is the name of Éomer's horse.
Yeah, and Éomer would never call him Nerethal.
Right.
Yeah, he just calls him Firefoot.
Right.
I love it. Great stuff.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to go ahead and pick up, before we get into discussing the passage, I'm going to go ahead and pick up the next little bit, and then we'll kind of talk about those as a whole.
All right, let's do that.
Frodo felt a fool. Not knowing what else to do, he crawled away under the tables to the dark corner by Strider, who sat unmoved, giving no sign of his thoughts. Frodo leaned back against the wall and took off the ring. How it came to be on his finger he could not tell. He could only suppose that he'd been handling it in his pocket while he sang, and that somehow it had slipped on when he stuck out his hand with a jerk to save his fall. For a moment he wondered if the ring itself had not played him a trick. Perhaps it had tried to reveal itself in response to some wish or command that was felt in the room. He did not like the looks of the men that had gone out. "Well," said Strider when he reappeared, "why did you do that? Worse than anything your friends could have said. You put your foot in it. Or should I say your finger?" "I don't know what you mean," said Frodo, annoyed and alarmed. "Oh, yes, you do," answered Strider. "But we'd better wait until the uproar has died down. Then, if you please, Mr. Baggins, I should like a quiet word with you." "What about?" asked Frodo. ignoring the sudden use of his proper name. "A matter of some importance to us both," answered Strider, looking Frodo in the eye. "You may hear something to your advantage." So let's discuss that wonderful passage, because there's quite a bit here, especially under the theme of the ring at work.
Yeah, I mean, and Frodo suspects it. He knows that the ring had played some sort of trick, or he suspects it. That it wanted to reveal itself.
We see the hints of it happening even before the
when
song.
He's just sort of fingering it in his pocket. Yeah,
he's got it. He clasps it in his hand, as if to keep a hold on it and prevent it from escaping or doing any mischief.
And that's really interesting, because he knows that it could be up to something here. And we also see that putting his hands in his pockets and fidgeting with stuff in his pockets is kind of like a little nervous tick, or a fidget that he has, when he's up there, when he's giving a speech. So he's kind of, he knows he does this, and he knows that the ring is in there and it could backfire on him, but he's got presence of mind enough to try and keep a grip on the ring to prevent it from doing any mischief.
Puts it in the palm of his hand and makes a fist around it. It's not going to get on my finger.
It's not that he's completely unaware of the danger that he's in with his hand in his pocket. No. But man, the ring finds a way, doesn't it?
It sure does. And he's tempted too. I mean, going back again to pre-song, the desire came over him to slip it on and vanish. So it's already trying to get the job done.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting, now that we're after the song, it's interesting to find that we think the ring itself might have been playing a trick on him. Again, we're coming back to the will of the ring and the ring at work. A wish or command that was felt in the room.
Yeah.
What do you think of that? What's in the room itself?
I mean,
we don't have the ring wraiths there.
No.
They're not fully invisible.
No, but
they are if they're not wearing their black.
Yeah.
I don't think there's one in here. Is what I'm saying.
Maybe this Dunlending, the squint-eyed Southerner who was there talking to Bill Ferny.
Yeah.
We just talked about how days ago he was talking to the ring wraiths. He knows something of their errand. He probably is starting to suspect something. There's these hobbits that have come out of the Shire, and he doesn't know anything, but maybe he is thinking, it would be great if the ring could come out now and I could report this to my master. Wow. To think that the ring might be able to pick up on that and respond to that. That's Frodo's speculation. I don't know if it's really what's happening.
Well, you're right.
But it is a scary thought if that's what's going on. Yeah. Because the ring is responding to the ill will and the ill intent of people in the room, which I guess we know it does do.
The evil will. You're right. It does. We know it responds to things like that. Alternatively, Frodo could be thinking that it came from inside the room, but really the Witch King is just not that far away, and it's responding to him even from a longer distance. That's another possibility.
It could be.
Yeah.
It's a very creepy moment, a very close shave.
It is.
And Strider, man.
You're right, it is.
Strider just scolds him over it. I mean,
I love it.
Have put your
By the way, I barely met you, but now I'm going to tell you what an idiot you are.
And I love, again, hints that Strider, there's more to him than meets the eye. He knows things. You put your foot in it, or should I say your finger. He's got such style, but he clearly knows.
And he doesn't even, then he drops the hints altogether and he says, Mr. Baggins.
Yeah, you're right.
It's no longer Mr. Underhill, if Barnum got your name right.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. He's at this point, he's letting his cards show. He's playing them and making sure that Frodo's aware that he knows something. Something very important.
I always feel like this is the moment when the book really takes off and just, and kind of hits the, and I'm not saying anything negative about the previous chapters. We've talked about all the great stuff there is in the previous chapters, but for some reason, this moment when Strider calls Frodo Mr. Baggins for the first time, that to me feels like, okay, we're buckled up now. This is like point of no return for this story now. It's going to start, speeding along.
I think cool. I see what you mean. I mean, the rest is all kind of prelude to this moment in a way.
And there's great stuff.
That all gets us here.
Yeah, and we've talked about,
lots of richness.
Exactly,
in that,
and all the before picture and things like that. But this feels like the moment when Frodo's peril really kind of takes off, and it kind of, he stays in peril pretty much for the rest of the book.
Yeah, you're right, he does. Interestingly, though, we won't read the one little line about Frodo agreeing. Frodo agrees to see him to see him later.
Yeah,
like okay, I'll talk to you later. Like you've convinced me that you know something.
Yeah,
Now, we won't see that until next episode. For now, though, I'm going to have you, Shawn, read this little bit here about the aftermath.
Okay. Meanwhile, an argument was going on by the fireplace. Mr. Butterbur had come trotting in, and he was now trying to listen to several conflicting accounts of the event at the same time. "I saw him, Mr. Butterbur," said a hobbit. "Or leastways I didn't see him, if you take my meaning. He just vanished into thin air, in a manner of speaking." "You don't say, Mr. Mugwort," said the landlord, looking puzzled. "Yes, I do," replied Mugwort. "And I mean what I say, what's more." "There's some mistake somewhere," said Butterbur, shaking his head. "There was too much of that Mr. Underhill to go vanishing into thin air, or into thick air, as is more likely in this room." "Well, where is he now?" cried several voices. "How should I know? He's welcome to go where he will, so long as he pays in the morning. There's Mr. Took now, he's not vanished." "Well, I saw what I saw, and I saw what I didn't," said Mugwort obstinately. "And I say there's some mistake," repeated Butterbur, picking up the tray and gathering up the broken crockery. "Of course there's a mistake," said Frodo. "I haven't vanished. Here I am. I've just been having a few words with Strider in the corner."
Sure.
Sure, yeah, buddy. Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Not like having a few
Nice
words with
try.
Strider in the corner isn't suspicious enough, but
I know, exactly. Oh, okay, so you didn't disappear to the floor. You've just been having words with the guy we all think is a creep.
Right, exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
That's going to help your standing with these people.
Yep, not the best cover story.
Oh, goodness. I do like Bartleman's very practical answer. He can go where he wants as long as he pays in the morning.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you should have collected up front, get a credit card number, put a hold on it. I don't know.
Yep. You can't do stuff like this anymore. Hotels have gotten too wise to it,
Yeah, seriously. You can't just disappear in the morning. So Frodo reveals himself, but nobody's satisfied, right? In fact, most of them, we're not going to read that paragraph, most of them end up leaving. Which they all stare at him.
Time to go home.
So they give him the side eye.
Things are getting shady in here tonight now.
Creepy, weird hobbit. Yeah. No one's left except for Strider. He's just sitting there in the shadows by the wall. Nobody notices he's even there. But I love Butterbur's approach to this. He's talking to Frodo about it. He says, what we'll get to in a moment. I'm going to pick up right before that. Mr. Butterbur did not seem much put out. He reckoned, very probably, that his house would be full again on many future nights until the present mystery had been thoroughly discussed. "Now, what have you been doing, Mr. Underhill?" he asked. "Frightening my customers and breaking up my crocks with your acrobatics?" "I am very sorry to have caused any trouble," said Frodo. "It was quite unintentional, I assure you. A most unfortunate accident." "All right, Mr. Underhill, but if you're going to do any more tumbling or conjuring or whatever it was, you'd best warn folk beforehand. And warn me. We're a bit suspicious round here of anything out of the way. Uncanny, if you understand me. And we don't take to it all of a sudden." "I shan't be doing anything of the sort again, Mr. Butterbur, I promise you. And now I think I'll be getting to bed. We shall be making an early start. Will you see that our ponies are ready by 8 o'clock? "Very good. But before you go, I should like a word with you in private, Mr. Underhill. Something has just come back to my mind that I ought to tell you. I hope that you'll not take it amiss. When I've seen to a thing or two, I'll come along to your room if you're willing." "Certainly," said Frodo, but his heart sank. He wondered how many private talks he would have before he got to bed, and what they would reveal. Were these people all in league against him? He began to suspect even old Butterbur's fat face of concealing dark designs.
Poor Frodo. He doesn't know who to trust right now. He's just he knows
really
he screwed up, and he just feels
at sea.
Yeah,
he's at sea.
Yeah.
He's not anchored.
Good
he's
way of
floating.
putting it. Yeah, he's at sea. Yeah, and he's very nervous. It's interesting that he is willing to talk to Strider privately, even though, for all he knows, Strider may know all that stuff because he's a Black Rider. I mean, Frodo doesn't really know anything about what the Black Riders really are.
Frodo doesn't know. No, and he knows that his name is Baggins, which is bad.
Right. But I guess, we'll see in the next chapter, Frodo just kind of has a feeling about Strider that...
Yeah, I think there's some intuition.
Yeah, for
sure. Some intuition that at least he's not, well, like you said, at least he's not a Black Rider.
Yeah.
That he'd seem fairer and feel fouler.
Eventually, yeah, that's a great line.
Isn't it? And I think that's in the next episode.
I love that Butterbur isn't troubled. He's...
Yeah. Oh, he thinks it's good for business, and he's right.
People are going to be talking about this for months.
People are going to be hanging out, drinking in the pub,
and he's broken up commotions like this before. This isn't that big of a deal.
Oh, I'm sure he has. He's got maybe a broken table
Yeah.
or something like that, some crockery that he's going to need
to replace. Yeah.
mend or
Yeah.
buy new stuff. Yeah. And Frodo's very practical. Hey, have the ponies ready by 8. We're going to be heading out. But all of this has triggered, finally, Butterbur's memory.
Yep. Finally, he remembers something, and we'll see what that is in the next chapter. But
yeah,
I wonder.
Well, I think he finally realizes he's remembered it. We'll get to what it is
wonder
later.
if he was starting to remember earlier. I almost wonder if he's covering for Frodo a little bit in the first part of that passage that you just read. He's kind of downplaying it.
Yeah,
people are
You're right. You're right. You make a good point. In other words, has actually the incident really triggered his memory that this was the guy?
Actually, going back to the passage that I read, where some of the hobbits like Mugwort are like, "Hey, man, this is really weird," and Butterbur's just saying, "Oh, there's some mistake. Right. It's not a big deal. There's Mr. Took over there."
You're right.
I think he might have already remembered something. He probably doesn't remember the details yet.
I think he remembers there was a letter from Gandalf.
And he's probably thinking like, this is probably that guy that Gandalf was telling me about. So if he's friends with Gandalf.
And I need to try to cover for him.
That's exactly right.
I think you're absolutely right. I think he's aware. He doesn't, of course, know the details of the letter, but he does know what Gandalf told him, which was there's a Mr. Underhill that's going to be coming, and you need to take good care of him.
But I think it says something about...
I think you make an excellent point.
Thank you. But I think it says something about Frodo and how...
Don't act surprised.
It's just so rare that, we give each other compliments on this show. But no, I think it says something about Frodo and how adrift he feels, as you were talking about, that Butterbur is remembering who he is, and Butterbur's trying to cover for him. Strider knows who he is, and Strider's trying to protect him and cover for him. But Frodo doesn't know what's going on, and he just feels... He feels threatened by all of this, and he's like, "Oh man, is even Butterbur out to get me?" Oh, it's got to be just a miserable place to be.
You're right.
Tolkien is kind of a master of understatement in terms of giving us Frodo's, emotional response to this.
Yeah.
It does say his heart sank.
Yeah, it's a good point. His discomfort level is very high. And I think we'll see in the next chapter that, in a way, that helps lead him to want to believe Strider. To kind of give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, good point.
That he's ready to kind of put himself in a better position, and he's hopeful that indeed Strider is who he says he is. Good point. We'll find out if he is in next episode.
Yes, we will.
So Butterbur's fat face may not be concealing any dark designs, but we will learn just how forgetful he was when we begin Chapter 10 of Book 1 of The Lord of the Rings next week with Strider.
Now, before we reach into Barlaman's bag, we want to remind you about the fellowship of the podcast. If you've been listening recently, you've heard us talk about how close we were to our next goal of setting up a Discord server.
Yep.
Well, it turns out our listeners have been tripping all over themselves to experience our private humiliation, which is just a fancy way of saying our Discord server is up and running.
That's right. But to keep our embarrassment amongst friends, that Discord server is limited to patrons at the Gift of Gondor level or higher. So if you want to listen in live during an episode recording, check out patreon.com/prancingponypod. You'll also get all sorts of other goodies like access to exclusive content and PPP swag. And check out our next goal. We're awfully close to it. In fact, we might have hit it by the time this episode releases, of setting up a monthly live hangout with us on Discord. Just a chance to chat with a couple of your friendly neighborhood podcast hosts.
That's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that when it happens.
It's going to be fun.
Well, if you're looking for a new Tolkien book in the meantime, check out the official library pages at our website, theprancingponypodcast.com, where we've put together a set of links for our listeners to all the books we've ever mentioned on the show, Tolkien or otherwise. And if you wouldn't mind posting a review on iTunes, we'd be grateful. That increases our visibility. That means more new listeners, more questions for Barlaman, more discussion on social media, and a more vibrant Tolkien community.
Now, speaking of social media, it's also helpful if you share us there. Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, wherever there happen to be Tolkien fans. Now, with that, it's time to see what old Barlaman has in the mailbag for us.
All right. Well, it's been 3 episodes since we said goodbye to Tom Bombadil, and even more than that since we last saw Goldberry. But thanks to our recording schedule, where we're recording episodes a little bit ahead of time, we're continuing to get questions in the mailbag about them. So we've got a few of those today. First up, Sam D. wrote to us and asked, is there any word nerdery on Goldberry's name? I speculate, and only speculate, as my limited research has turned up little, that the gold describes her hair. The berry part of her name has me wondering, though. So I'll paraphrase the next bit of this, but Sam basically says that between the online etymology dictionary and Wiktionary and some of the online sources like that, he says he's found very little, except for the fact that berry comes from Old English beria, which is a native Germanic word that's of uncertain origin, but might ultimately derive from a Proto-Indo-European root meaning to chew. And I'm sorry, I'm getting really nerdy there.
Wow, you really are, yes.
I go deep on these etymologies. When I see Indo-European roots, I'm just like, ooh, yes. But
you get chills when you see that.
I do. I really do. But anyway, it gets interesting at this point because going back to Sam's own words here, he says, despite the Wiktionary's dubious entries, it lists this as one definition of berry, one of the ova or eggs from a fish. I like this one in particular, he says, due to the abundant water imagery we get with Goldberry. Even the shoes she wears at one point during the Hobbit's stay were like fish's mail. Sam also says that amongst its other definitions, it's been suggested that the word berry may also be derived from Old English bear, meaning mountain, hill, or barrow. And it's more of a point of trivia than anything, he says, but he says, I thought it was interesting. Finally, Sam says, what do you guys think about this? I'm surprised you haven't already word nerded over it, although this may be because you have already mentioned it and I missed it, or you're planning it for something else.
Well, you haven't missed it, Sam, but I'm surprised we haven't talked about it before now. I mean, seriously, the nymph that laid the golden egg. I mean, how can we not talk about that?
Right. I know. It just seems like the kind of thing we would love.
Tom and the Beanstalk. I mean, it's a perfect fit. Shawn, have you got anything on this?
Not much until now, and that's why I haven't brought it up. The truth is, aside from, the very obvious surface meaning of Goldberry, there just isn't really much definitive to be found about what her name actually means. Even one of my usual go-to resources for this, Tolkien's own nomenclature of the Lord of the Rings, it's not really much help because under the name Goldberry, he just says, translate by sense. So
wow, that's helpful. Thank you.
That was a guide for translators, working with his work. And he basically is just saying, take it at its literal English meaning.
That's fair enough. But why is that an appropriate name for a river daughter? I mean, okay, gold is descriptive of her hair. That makes sense. But berry really is mysterious, isn't it? I mean, is there anything to this fish egg thing that Sam's come up with?
I will admit I had not heard that before he wrote to us, but he is absolutely correct. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, that is one sense of the word berry. The OED also says that specifically in this aquatic sense, a hen lobster carrying her eggs is said to be in berry or buried. So that's kind of cool. Although,
interesting.
I have to admit, it is. I mean, despite the obvious aquatic implications of that sense, I'm not really convinced that that's what Tolkien was thinking of. Only because, according to the OED, it seems to be a pretty rare usage. There's, I think, 3 definitions of berry given in the OED, and this is the third. It's the last one, and there are only 2 quotations given for it, occurring between 1768 and 1876.
Wow.
Now,
over 100 years, and there's 2 quotes.
Right, exactly. Now, anybody who's looked at OED entries before knows that they sometimes have a dozen quotations over 1,000 years. And we've got 2 in the space of, just under 100 years. It just doesn't seem like that well attested of a word. So I'm not really sure if that's what Tolkien was thinking of.
Yeah.
Now, there is one other interesting thing that I found while I was researching this, though.
Are you sure?
Now,
I'm kidding.
I'm not sure it's interesting.
Are you sure it's interesting? That's what I meant.
I found it. I found it for sure.
I
don't know how interesting it is. This is pure speculation, and maybe I should stop there. But
no, that actually makes it interesting. Go ahead.
I'm not going to because this is a lot of fun. A 19th century. I don't know if it's fun either.
I was going to say fun might be a stretch, but okay, I'll let you.
A 19. Hey, I'm the guy who goes like yes when I say Proto-Indo-European.
Proto-Indo-European. Wow.
Yeah. So again, total speculation, but a 19th century philologist named John Bannister did some work on the Cornish language. Now, that's a Celtic language that's native to Cornwall in southwest England. And he published a glossary of Cornish names between 1869 and 1871. I think he published it in like 7 serial parts or something.
Oh, okay.
Now, I've got no evidence that Tolkien actually read Bannister's work, so that's why this is total speculation. But he was a philologist working in England, just, half a century before Tolkien.
True.
So it does seem possible. I don't know for sure that Tolkien actually studied Cornish, but he did spend time in Cornwall, and he did study Welsh, and he did study Breton, which are 2 languages, I think the 2 languages that are most closely related to Cornish. So maybe I'm willing to say there's maybe a 50-50 chance he might have known this glossary of Cornish names by Bannister.
Sure.
And the reason I bring that up is this. Apparently, the name Goldberry is attested as an actual person's name in Cornwall because Bannister included it, and the etymology that he gave for it was Cornish Gwael and Berwick. Now, I could be mispronouncing both of those. I know nothing about Cornish, but apparently it's Cornish for rich field.
Oh, wow.
Now,
Okay.
Now, Bannister's etymologies are highly conjectural. That doesn't really matter for purposes of this. I mean, if Tolkien knew the work, he might have been influenced by this, etymology, even if it wasn't an accurate one. And the reason that this is kind of sticking with me is I'm remembering something Tolkien said in The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, that the name Tom Bombadil was Bucklandish in form.
Yeah.
Well, remember, Bucklander names are supposed to be vaguely Celtic, right? That's in Appendix F. So maybe if Tom Bombadil's name was supposed to sound Celtic, maybe Goldberry's name is supposed to sound Celtic too. I don't know. I'm really deep in speculation territory here, but it's a possibility.
Very seriously deep. And, it doesn't mean we can't enjoy that speculation, but you probably ought to get your hip waders on or maybe even a hazmat suit on because you're in really deep. There might be three people still listening to this part of the show. Everybody else is going, when is this part going to end?
I hope there's 3 left. I've got the hazmat suit on. I've got like the beekeeper suit over it.
There you go.
I've got like a fencing mask. Yeah, I'm totally protecting myself from this.
Good.
Now, there's one thing that makes all of this kind of interesting to me. There's one thing.
There's the qualifier that matters.
There's the qualifier. Yeah, interesting to Shawn is a pretty not saying much. But
that's not a category on $25,000 pyramid anytime soon.
No.
Things that are interesting to Shawn.
No, please, that's not this one.
No,
pass on all this.
Pass.
One thing all these etymologies have in common, whether her name literally means goldberry, or whether it's meant to be a pun on gold fish egg, or whether it's a Cornish word meaning rich field. All of these possible etymologies, when I read them, they imply fertility, abundance.
Yeah.
And although that doesn't fit really well with the water imagery that we think of with her, it does fit well with the idea of her as a representation of those seasonal changes of the land that we talked about.
Yeah.
And with her and Tom as nature spirits. So I don't know. It's a possibility. It's really all I can come up with is to really dig deep into speculation. As far as I'm concerned, maybe Tolkien had any one of these 3 meanings in his head when he named her Goldberry. Maybe he had all of them. Maybe he had none of them, folks.
Maybe.
I can't prove anything, so take all this with a grain of salt.
There you go. I'm going to take that with a very large piece of, like a salt lick, actually. I'm probably going to use with that, but yeah. Yeah. Now I'm hungry. Well, there you go, Sam. I hope you enjoyed that speculation to your question, because I don't think we have an answer.
Best I can do, Sam.
Exactly. Well, next up, Ethan B. wrote to us after hearing our first episode on In the House of Tom Bombadil, and that wonderful scene of the water in the hobbits' drinking bowls setting free their voices so that they began singing merrily as if it was easier and more natural than talking. Now, Ethan said, I noticed something that I hadn't before as you were discussing the water, or whatever it is, that the hobbits drank. It seems to me, at least, to be very reminiscent of Otherurr.
Nicely done.
Odin's mead, which gave the one who drank it substantial ability in poetry and scholarship.
Oh, yeah.
As you know, Tolkien was greatly influenced by Norse mythology, so there is no doubt that he was familiar with the story and the concept introduced in it. I'd be very interested in hearing your opinions or explanation of this scene. Shawn?
That's an interesting catch.
It is, huh? Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that much about Otherurr. What I do know, I owe to Neil Gaiman in his recent book, Norse Mythology. Actually had a chapter on it. And I remember it being a pretty cool story about basically how Odin acquired the mead of poetry and how he doles it out to inspire poets, and actually good and bad poets get different samples of the mead. Check out the story if you're interested.
I will.
There's no doubt that Tolkien knew the story.
Oh,
and
sure.
It is quite possible that he was giving a slight nod to it here. I mean, I'd say it's only the slightest of nods. To me, I feel like hobbits singing merrily is, I mean, it's a bit of a step down from like the kind of poetic inspiration that the
they're
Norse
not singing
myth
in
is
verse.
talking about.
They're not doing Tom.
Right.
work.
Yeah, and they're not, they're not singing sagas. It's not.
That's true.
This isn't. Yeah, so I mean, I'm not saying it's not a nod. I think it's just a very slight nod, if it is one.
That's fair.
And I'd also point out, I mean, the drink that they're drinking doesn't really seem to be mead.
Yeah, I think that's the clinch.
Yeah, I mean, it's seemed like clear cold water, the text says. Whereas, you look at something like the cordial they got from Gildor, which was pale golden and smelled like honey. Well, that seems like mead.
Yeah,
so I think it's possible that Tolkien was ever so slightly hinting in that direction. So, I mean, I think you're onto something there, Ethan, but I do think it's probably just a very slight nod, probably just to show that Tom Bombadil is, a supernatural being in a general sense.
Yeah.
I don't know. You have any thoughts?
Well, the only thought I have really on this is that when it comes to Tom, I'm not sure there's anything we can rule out.
True.
But I think the fact that it seemed to be clear cold water takes it out of the mead category. But truth of the matter is, as long as I don't have to pronounce the name of Odin's mead again, I'm good either way. So we're okay.
Oh, the Rorir. Oh, the Rorir.
Okay.
Oh, I don't even know
if you say so. If you say so.
I don't know. I'm trying. I'm trying, folks.
Well, do we have time for one more?
Yeah, I think we probably do.
Yeah.
We've got one from Paul G. in Colchester, England, who wrote to us with, "How did Farmer Maggot first meet Tom Bombadil? As the Shire did not appear to be part of Tom's lands, Maggot would have had to go to him. One way would be through the gate in the high hay used by Frodo and his colleagues, but this, I think, is the Brandybuck's private entrance, as referred to by Mary in A Conspiracy Unmasked, and I don't think its secret would be revealed to Maggot. Maggot could have reached Tom Bombadil's house via the Great East Road, but he would have had to travel right through the old forest or across the Barrow Downs to get there. No, I think Farmer Maggot met Tom Bombadil by rowing up the Withywindle. It's said that most hobbits regarded small boats with misgivings, but Farmer Maggot could have been one of the minority who didn't. I don't know why Farmer Maggot made the journey in the first place. Perhaps he had a tookish sense of adventure, or perhaps he'd heard tales of Tom Bombadil from Bucklanders and wanted to see if they were true. I assume that Tom Bombadil would have taken Farmer Maggot to his house, although there's no mention of him meeting Goldberry." And then Paul goes on to say a little bit about the poem Bombadil Goes Boating, which we read from not too long ago.
Yeah.
And he talks about that scene in which he says there's a character who's said to be Tom Bombadil. He rows down the Withywindle to the Brandywine and is attacked by hobbits at Grindwall who shoot arrows at him. He says, "I think that it's unlikely to be Tom Bombadil, but it could be a confused later folk memory of Farmer Maggot returning from a visit to his friend and being mistaken for an undesirable from the old forest." Once more, thanks for taking the time to read my ramblings. Well, I don't think they were really ramblings, Paul. Very, very intriguing thoughts. Thank you for those. And I don't know, Alan, what do you got?
They are interesting thoughts. Paul raises an interesting point about the poem Bombadil Goes Boating, which we read that passage from in episode 116, the one about Bombadil coming to visit Maggot. Now, we didn't get into this in that episode, but the poem is meant to be a Hobbit composition written by the Bucklanders sometime long after the events of the War of the Ring. Now, in the preface to The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, Tolkien writes, and this is from within the frame of his own frame narrative, that this poem and the adventures of Tom Bombadil itself evidently come from the Buckland. They show more knowledge of that country and of the Dingle, the wooded valley of the Withywindle, than any hobbits west of the Marish were likely to possess. They also show that the Bucklanders knew Bombadil, though no doubt they had as little understanding of his powers as the Shire folk had of Gandalf's. Both were regarded as benevolent persons, mysterious maybe and unpredictable, but nonetheless comic. The poem, Bombadil Goes Boating, was probably composed much later and after the visit of Frodo and his companions to the House of Bombadil.
So it's not entirely clear whether Bombadil's visit to Maggot in the Marish in that poem was something that actually happened, or whether it's just a story told in this poem much later.
Yeah.
Even though, I kind of like to believe it happened, but
sure.
Yeah, it does seem kind of unlikely, I guess.
It does, I admit. But so Paul is saying that he believes this story is apocryphal, that Tom Bombadil never actually came to visit Maggot. Maybe the real event that it's based on was actually Maggot returning from a visit to Bombadil, being mistaken for a trespasser. It's an interesting suggestion. Despite the poem, it does seem more likely that Maggot would have gone out to meet Tom rather than Tom coming to the Marish to visit Maggot, especially since Tom got his recent knowledge of events in the Shire from Maggot, not from visiting there himself.
Yeah, and of course there is the fact that Tom Bombadil typically doesn't leave the borders of his own land.
Yeah, that's kind of the big thing, yeah.
Yeah, we're not 100% sure that he can't, right?
True.
We do know that he won't leave to help Frodo out on his quest.
True.
So, okay, let's assume that Maggot and Tom met somewhere in Tom's own land. Did
Okay.
Maggot reach Tom by rowing up the Withywindle, as Paul says, or did he just take the East Road? I mean, I don't think we have any way of knowing. I mean, Maggot does identify more with the Bucklanders than with Hobbiton folk, and so maybe he is more fond of boats
True, that could
than we
be.
might think.
Maybe.
But I wouldn't rule out the possibility of Maggot just meeting Tom Bombadil somewhere on the road. I mean,
Possible.
remember that the East Road is not really all that dangerous if you're not being pursued by ringwraiths.
Well, yeah, there's that.
Yeah, I mean, remember, the hobbits got off of the road because of the wraiths coming after them.
Right,
And
right.
that's what sent them into the old forest, and that's where things got kind of scary for them.
Yeah.
I see no reason why Maggot couldn't just take the road and meet Tom there somewhere within or close to the borders of Tom's own country.
Sure.
And from that point, if Tom decided that he wanted to take Maggot back to his house to meet Goldberry or drink some tea or whatever, though we don't know for sure that any of that ever happened.
Right.
I mean, Maggot would be safe enough, so I could certainly see that happening.
Sure. Well, folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony podcast. Now, please be sure to join us again next week when we spend a bit more time with a mysterious vagabond with a rascally look.
Folks, thanks again for listening, and thank you for making our common room on Facebook such a fun place to spend time. We want all of you to be a part of this conversation, and it doesn't stop when the episode ends. See the comments, questions, corrections, and
Plenty
more.
of those, I would say. Plenty of those.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have had, and I'm sure we will have more. Probably some to this episode.
Yep.
On Facebook at the Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
And a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdan's contribution tier. To May in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Emily in Texas, and Chad in Texas. Thank you all.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, video of your most embarrassing moments while singing in a pub. And we mean that. I really want to see those.
Are you sure about that? Okay.
I'll let
All right.
I'll let you screen them first. But send those to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com, and, well, we'll try to get them onto our social media channels or into our next show.
There you go.
Well, however long we've had, it is still, as always, far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time,
Farewell, friends.